Resident Evil Revelations has one of the most complex and tangled narratives that we've ever seen from the series. The amount of interorganizational drama, new characters, multiple subplots, topped off with the fact that Clive was playing games with us the whole time, can make for some very confusing moments as you try to recall where certain events occur within the timeline. So today we're going to be taking a look at this game and explaining some things that I think can be confusing about the story, as well as that post-credit scene which plays into Resident Evil 5, sort of. But let's begin by hitting off a little bit of an overview of the story to get you in the mood.
Previously on Resident Evil Revelations.
So to look into the story of Revelations is to look into the story of the BSAA. Something that became apparent to me as I was making the Clive O'Brien video is that he is the main character of this game, despite the fact that he's on the sidelines. Essentially, he's a proxy for the BSAA and their rise to prominence. The point being to explain how the organization got to the role they had in RE5, and acting as kind of a lead into that game, despite the fact that it was released 3 years later. So to look at it from that lens, the BSAA is established just before the events of Revelations, but doesn't have any strong affiliations and is mainly just a background actor. They have experts like Chris and Jill, but largely they don't have any clearances to act as anything but support. While they're still in this toddler stage of evolution, Terragrigia happens and they are called in to offer assistance to the FBC, who is essentially America's BSAA. They operate as something like the FBI, but for bioterror. They've been around for longer than the BSAA and thus have more authority. When Terragrigia is attacked, the FBC leads the efforts to aid the city, but as I'm sure you know, Lansdale's got some personal conflicts. The situation lasts for 3 weeks, and we don't have many details on it, but it's assumed to be bad. So bad that it's seen as a bit of a saving grace when he decides to give the city the mother of all sunburns and wipe it off the planet. O'Brien is angry with the situation because he wants to keep pushing and looking for some kind of lead on Veltro, to figure out where they even got the resources to pull off an attack like this in the first place. But since that answer is Lansdale, he's less enthused to do that. O'Brien then concocts his convoluted plan with a member of the FBC, Raymond Vester, wherein they pretend that Veltro is back alive and still a threat. Raymond pretends to be a member of Veltro, and they have this base set up in the mountains. I'm kind of confused by the base, to be honest with you. I thought at first that O'Brien set it up, but the more I look into it, the more it seems like it might have been a legit Veltro base at some point or something. Quint pulls some data from the FBC's files from that location later in the game, which must mean that the FBC were involved there in the past, but I don't believe we're ever given good enough explanation as to what that place actually was, nor Raymond and O'Brien's involvement in it, other than they had a hand there in some capacity. Anywho, they do all this because there's a mole for the FBC in the BSAA, but they don't know who it is. Essentially, the ploy is to get the mole to relay the information that Veltro is still out there to Lansdale and make him panic so that they can get some kind of incriminating evidence on him. They fail at that, but luckily Quint managed to find the data about the Queen Dido, and we find the leader of Veltro who has the necessary evidence to put Lansdale away.
Morgan Lansdale. You are hereby relieved of your position as FBC Commissioner.
Lansdale's arrest is what brings down the FBC, and the BSAA absorbs most of their assets, bringing it to the standing with which we see it during the events of RE5. You know, with a few years of growing pains. That's basically where the story ends, with the BSAA emboldened in this new role as a global overseer of bioterror, despite Clive retiring from the director's chair. However, if you've played the game, then you know that that's not technically the end, as we're thrown one more tease from a post-credit scene.
Almost too easy, wasn't it? The company let them take Morgan out with the trash.
Tough world.
You filed a report on this. By the way, why save Parker?
I have my reasons.
The BSAA isn't as useless as I thought. Things could really heat up.
Indeed. The fun's just getting started.
I think you'd be forgiven for finding this scene to be a head-scratcher because it never plays into anything. No other game touches these characters, nor the T-Abyss virus, so we're left with a cliffhanger of who they are even working for, or what their goals were. At least in most of the world. Because in Japan, they got something called Jessica's Report, which was a DVD exclusive. Luckily, it's since been translated by fans though, and it does give a slight bit of context. That context being that Jessica was working for a woman named Terragrigia, which would in turn mean she was working for Tricell. That's right. Jessica was a mole for Tricell while being a mole for the FBC while working for the BSAA. And Raymond was a mole for Tricell while being a mole for the BSAA while working for the FBC. There are a few more tiny nuggets of interest in the report, but none of it is really tied to any greater narrative, as it's mainly just a breakdown of Jessica's opinions on key players in the story. The report also happens one day before the events of the game, so it's not giving information after the fact. The cutscene also makes it sound like Lansdale was under the thumb of Tricell in some capacity. I'm not entirely sure what that's about, but perhaps he also had some kind of tie to Tricell. As for what became of Jessica or Raymond after they leave the coffee house, your guess is as good as mine, since we don't have any more interactions between them and Excella in RE5, so they could have just been spies whose loyalty was up for sale. Hard to say, and we'll likely never see them again, which makes it even harder. Anyway, that's what happened at the end of Resident Evil Revelations. I mainly just wanted to go over it in this more informal way, because when I cover it in my lore videos, it'll be much more obscure since I try to play them more straight. Regardless, it's interesting to see where the BSAA kind of got its start, since we'll presumably be seeing its end in Resident Evil 9. Theoretically, some of these people from Revelations should still be entangled in the organization, so it'll be interesting to see if they make their way back into the narrative. Anyway, thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.